Welcome back. As you know, I'm Eli, the computer guy, here for the Daily Blob, where we say, Europe. Europe? You're up? No. Europe. Europe. Have I heard of Europe? I think I've heard of Europe. Isn't Europe one of those shitty-ass little third world countries in the middle of Africa? Right? There's like the Democratic Republic of Congo, and then like Europe. Isn't Europe that shitty-ass little country that's even worse than the Democratic Republic of Congo? Could I pick Europe out on a map? I don't know. I'll just point to the middle of Africa and I'll assume it's there. No, that's not where Europe is. That's not what Europe is. Oh, I love fucking with the Europeans. It puts a smile on my face. Screwing with the 14-year-olds. I mean, not that way. Anyways, screwing with the Europeans, it just makes me a happy boy. Anyways, I do think this is an interesting story, talking about the fracturing of the technology world. Because of the current administration in the United States. Look, I'm either gonna laugh or I'm gonna cry. I can either laugh at Europe or cry about the United States. I prefer to be a man who laughs. Anyways, we have this the fracture, the fracturing of the current world order because of our current president is doing something. I don't know what the fuck this boy is doing at this point in time. Did you see that? He put out a truth post talking about how Chicago is going to learn why the Department of War has war in it. Like, what? Trump is going to go to war with Chicago. Which, you know, in this timeline, you're like, yeah, that makes a whole bunch of sense. Anyways, there's a whole bunch of issues right now. With current administration, what they're doing to our country, what they're doing to the world. And I've been talking about a lot about this in regards to China, right? So basically you had China. China was producing a lot of things, doing a lot of things, but they were still buying a lot of our high value products, right? So especially in the artificial intelligence world and the silicon and the chip world, the idea is they focus on what they have the expertise to build and what they can scale with a reasonable cost, and then they buy the other things, right? They buy GPUs, they buy CPUs, that type of deal. We had the Biden administration. So the Biden administration, previous administration, now the Trump administration, they're trying to prevent China from getting GPUs and these pieces of AI hardware. And so basically we now have China creating their own AI tech stack because they've been forced to, right? One of the big things you have to be thinking about in life is what are your options? What are your options? So even if GPUs and AI equipment is expensive, right? If it's better for you to put resources somewhere else, you'll just continue to buy that expensive hardware because you have a better return on investment if you invest in other things. If all of a sudden you cannot get this AI hardware, right? That's no longer an option, then you'll start investing and building, your AI capabilities simply because you don't have any other option out there. And so I've been talking about a lot about this with China. Because you have Huawei, you have Alibaba, you have the DeepSeek models come out, you have the Ascend, Aspire, anyways, you have the GPUs coming out, you have all that kind of stuff there. One of the things I've been talking about is basically the fracturing of the tech stacks, that over the past, 20, 30, 40 years, the tech stack that most IT people have been dealing with has been relatively similar. Right, as I've talked about before, when I got my MCSE, right, as an MCSE back in 2000, I could be an administrator in a hospital, I could be an administrator at a corrections facility, I could be an administrator for a construction company, I could be an administrator in a hospital or a hotel, simply because everybody used Microsoft systems, Intel computers, and Cisco networking gear. Like whatever the vertical was, whatever the industry was, everybody used the exact same stuff. What's becoming interesting though is basically our government is forcing this fracturing of the technology industry so that we're starting to get divergent stacks. And then what becomes interesting, right? One of the things that's fascinating for me, so I've been doing online tech education since 2009. So What the hell is that? 16 years. 16 years I've been screaming into a camera. Well, here's the thing. For 16 years, when I screamed into a camera, right? Somebody who's in Baltimore could use my education. Somebody who's in Madrid could use my education. Somebody who's in I don't know, in South Africa or Mumbai or anyways, Hong Kong, right? They could use this, right? Windows is Windows. Linux is more or less Linux. TCP/IP is more or less TCP/IP. The interesting question that comes up is what happens when these systems start fracturing, and so it's not the same. What happens when the people in Hong Kong actually start to use technology systems that are divergent from our systems? What happens when people in South Africa have to then start determining, right, what branch of the tech stack are they going to go down? And so with this, most of the time I talk about the United States and I talk about China, not to be a China shill, just because it's the most obvious. It is the most obvious thing going on. One of the other interesting things I've talked about with this whole AI divergence thing is that so many American tech companies are now producing their own hardware in a way that it wasn't done before, right? A lot of times when you think about things like processors, companies building their own processors, you think about like Apple, right? So Apple licenses the ARM architecture and then they build their M2s, M3, M4 processor. That's one of the things you're focused on. One of the things that gets glossed over, though, is that Google is having their own processors being created. Meta is actually having their own processors being created. We're now having OpenAI. OpenAI has an agreement, maybe, we think, with Broadcom, worth maybe, possibly $10 billion to produce their own AI hardware. And so what becomes interesting is even within the United States, in this AI sphere, right, the hardware that's being used, Google is using Google's AI hardware. OpenAI will use OpenAI's hardware, right? I talked with somebody who deployed the first Azure data center, right? So he was actually one of my viewers back in the day. Don't know what happened to him. Anyways, he was one of my viewers, and he talked about that. He talked about the requirements of deploying 500,000 servers. But here's the thing. When he deployed 500,000 servers, they were basically the same servers, more or less, you could buy from Newegg. Right, they had some particular requirements, but the storage was off-the-shelf storage. The processors were off-the-shelf processors. The RAM was off-the-shelf RAM. They needed a shit ton of it. They needed a shit ton of it. But it was all the same stuff, right? So if you as a little A+ technician went into an Azure data center, you more or less understood what was going on. It was just the scale and how to deal with scale that was mind-blowing. What becomes interesting now, though, is that we're starting to get these individual tech stacks, even in the United States. And it's something to consider, right, with your career and where you're going to be going. And this becomes even more interesting with Europe. Europe, right? That pissant little shithole country in the middle of Africa. Right, that one. I think that's Europe. I do believe that's Europe. Anyways, what's interesting with Europe is, like, we forget to talk about Europe because, you know, why would we bother? But they are thinking a lot of the same things that China is thinking. Again, one of my big concerns here. So coming from CNBC, AI firm Mistral valued at $14 billion as chip giant ASML takes a major stake. So ASML, they are the ones that produce the lithography equipment to actually be able to create chips. I think they're the Dutch company. We'll talk about it in a second. And so basically the idea here is that this major company that creates the equipment in order to produce chips is now investing a lot of money into an AI company that's also in Europe because Europe, wait for it, they want their own AI stack too. So Trump has been very successful at devaluing the shit out of the American AI stack. Hey, if Trump's goal was to devalue the American AI stack, he's doing a fabulous job. Anyways, I do find this to be interesting, and I think this is going to be curious. Like thinking about what systems are going to look like in 2035. Right when I got into tech in '96, so I started in the Army in '96. Everything was still very much electronics. Right, you can make $100,000 a year repairing VCRs of all things. Right, soldering capacitors and resistors and all that kind of stuff. That was a good way to make money. Then we went into the computer world. But even the computer world, right? If you go back to 2000, everything was siloed, right? So you had your access control system, you had your telephone system, you had your computer systems, you had your surveillance systems. All of them used their own networking technologies. All of them used their own media, whether it was coax or twisted pair or whatever cable to connect together. They were all completely separated. Then we had something called convergence. Convergence is where everything got brought together. So now everything runs on IPv4. Right, so you have VoIP, voice over IP telephones, you have digital surveillance systems, you have digital access control systems. All of this stuff is using IPv4, Ethernet standards, the whole 9 yards, right? Then we go into the mobile world, so much is now mobile. Right, and that's an architecture style. That's an architecture style. And so one of the things to be thinking about with your career, especially if you're young, is what do you think the architecture styles are going to start looking like for 2035? How will you build systems for 2035? What are going to be the most important things? And previously, it was price, it was performance, that type of deal. I would argue going into the future, it's going to be more regulatory compliance, right? If you're keeping data, can you verify that your data is secured or maintained in a way that complies with the regulations for your particular country or municipality or whatever else? And so I think that's one of the interesting things with these whole, the different stacks, is I think going into the future, you're going to be designing your product much more based off of regulations and requirements, regulatory requirements, than you are, again, even price and performance. If we come here, NVIDIA, so NVIDIA actually has backed them. Mistral AI clinched an 11.7 billion euro. 13.8 billion US dollar valuation, a Series C funding round that saw Dutch chip equipment maker ASML secure a major stake in the French firm. ASML pumped 1.3 billion euros in Mistral's AI's 1.7 billion euro funding round as lead investor, gaining an 11% shareholding in the French company on a fully diluted basis. So ASML now owns 11% of Mistral. The other thing to be thinking about here is basically how companies support each other, right? We heard this with OpenAI. I don't know what the fuck's going on right now with OpenAI and Microsoft. That seems to be an absolute crap show. But one of the big things with OpenAI and Microsoft was the idea is OpenAI is its own company. Microsoft invested into OpenAI, and then OpenAI provides products and services for Microsoft, right? That's supposed to be a synergistic business, coming together where one company gets money, the others gets products and services, and then they support each other to try to push their products forward. So if you have ASML taking 11% stake in Mistral, it does become interesting, like what synergistic offerings, might be on the table going in the future. The investment round, which was previously reported by Reuters, more than doubles Mistral's 5.8 billion euro valuation achieved during a 600 million euro funding round last year. As swaths of cash continue to pour into the booming AI industry, the fundraising round turns ASML into one of Mistral's top shareholders. Mistral, one of Europe's most competitive tech startups and widely seen as a regional rival of Sam Altman's OpenAI. At the start of summer, Mistral CEO Arthur Minch told CNBC during the London Tech Week that the company is launching its first reasoning model, touted as, quote, great at mathematics and great at coding, to compete with OpenAI and China's DeepSeek. ASML's investment and shareholding, which the Dutch firm billed as, quote, a first-of-its-kind partnership, critically arms the two-year-old Mistral with tools to lessen its reliance on Silicon Valley. And so think about that. Right? This is literally, these are European technology companies specifically doing things to lessen their reliance on Silicon Valley. At a time when the European Union is pushing for its AI movement to stand on its own feet and faces protectionist trade measures of U.S. President Trump, ASML Chief Financial Officer Roger Dawson will assume a seat at Mistral's Strategic Committee board as part of the company's investment. So anyways, in some ways, this is pretty boring business news, right? ASML invests in Mistral, whoopee crap, who the hell cares? I think what is more interesting here is basically these companies coming together to start working more synergistically and start trying to build those more nationalized or regionalized stacks. The idea being we cannot trust the United States anymore. Since we cannot trust the United States anymore, how are we going to build our own systems so that we have self-reliance? And so it'll be curious to see how this pushes forward. Again, when I talk about the whole China thing, I get this whole thing that, oh, I'm just a China shill or whatever. The big thing to understand with the whole China disaster that's going on in the AI world is that they're just it's something easy to talk about, right? You know who the fuck China is. You know whether or not you agree with them. You know what the arguments are for the export controls. You understand that they're considered the factory of the world. You understand all those stories, right? There are a lot of other stories out there that are just as important, but trying to explain them becomes much more difficult, right? What is the relevance of Meta? Think about this. What is the relevance of Meta creating their own AI chips, right? That is incredibly significant, but it's also a little bit more difficult to talk about, right? OpenAI creating their own literal AI hardware stack, right? That's incredibly significant, but it's also kind of gets lost in how do you explain it, right? Talking about China, talking about Huawei. As soon as you put Huawei and China on it, it becomes a lot more obvious why this is significant. And so I think what's interesting here is looking at this is now seeing Europe. Europe is now, again, it's that protectionist self-reliance mode that they're getting into. And it's why I'm just frustrated as an American, because this isn't going to work out well for our companies, right? If basically, the Trump administration goes around the world and says, we have the strongest beef or we have the strongest GPUs, and if you want access to what we have to sell, you're going to have to jump through a whole hell of a lot of hoops and, kiss the ring. You're just going to have a lot of folks out there literally say no. And one of the big arguments that I make here with a lot of this stuff is cutting edge is only exceedingly valuable for a fraction of a second. One of the big problems we have in the technology world is we don't know what's possible. And this is an important thing to consider. Like when you're sitting there and you're trying to figure out where you're going to invest or whatever, one of the big problems we run into is many times we don't know what's possible, right? So normal business, normal fucking business is you sit there, you look at products or services or whatever else, you look at what you're trying to do, you get the stakeholders involved, you figure out how much you can sell the product or service for, you figure out how much it costs to sell said product or service, you then talk with the marketing and advertising people about scaling how many of those products or services can you sell, and then you do a whole bunch of that math to figure out if it makes sense for your business, right? Business is really just boring math, like 1 + 1, 2 - 2, that kind of math, right? And you just do it at scale and you come up with a business idea. One of the big things in the technology world, though, many times, is you literally just don't know what the fuck's possible. You don't know what something's worth. It's like, I think this is gonna be valuable. Look at it with metaverse. Look at it, Mark Zuckerberg and the metaverse, right? Pumped tens of millions of dollars in that shit show because he was a true believer. We still don't really have I still haven't even used the metaverse, right? But that's the thing. It's like, hey, I think VR goggles are going to be the way to go. And then people put money into it. Some people might be successful. Some people lose money. But one of the big things is for these companies is to figure out what actually matters, to figure out what is actually valuable, right? The iPhone comes out. shows the world that smartphones are valuable, and that's when Google buys Android and pushes Android forward. Would Google have purchased Android so many years ago and pushed it forward if the iPhone wasn't shown to be successful? And so the concern here with artificial intelligence is that, you know, people have been looking at different AI routes, right? There's a lot of different, like, again, when I bring up the whole question of like, what is AI? That's not being esoteric. There's a real question there. Like, when we talk about AI, what is AI? And so there's a lot of different routes you can go down to try to do AI, right? And it requires software, and it requires hardware, and it requires training. It requires a tremendous number of man hours by incredibly smart, i.e. expensive people, to try to go down these different routes. And so I think what's kind of curious right now is basically with OpenAI, OpenAI proved this particular system of artificial intelligence works and has some value to it. How much value? Who knows, right? But we heard about ChatGPT. When you hear about ChatGPT, it was like 2 or 3 years ago. It was like ChatGPT. All anybody talked about was ChatGPT. And now, one of the things I discuss is you can use Ollama. So Ollama is an LLM framework. You can literally download it, put it on your computer, and there are 1,000 LLM models out there that you can run locally on your computer, right? ChatGPT proved, they've spent a tremendous amount of money to prove the concept, and right now they're trying to prove the business case. The thing is, once you prove the concept, then other people can piggyback. This is one of the reasons why first mover advantage is not necessarily a good thing. A lot of times, first movers burn all of their investment money literally just to get to the point to prove the product is valuable. And then they have no more money to scale and ship product. Right? So they just burn $1 billion to prove something's valuable. And then the second movers and the third movers and the 20th movers come in. They take all the lessons learned. They don't have to spend that money anymore. The concept has already been proven. The technology has already been deployed. All of that's already been created. They can focus on the business use cases. They can focus on how to actually get profit out of these things. And so that's where I get concerned with this whole AI deal, is like there's this focus like NVIDIA, right? There's this idea that because NVIDIA is currently king, it always has to be king. You know, just like AOL, just like BlackBerry, just like Yahoo, just like Intel. I mean, obviously NVIDIA is always going to own AI. Look at Intel. Like we literally have Intel in something that looks a hell of a lot like a death spiral going on right now. But yet, for some reason, people think NVIDIA cannot lose. Anyways, and that's one of my concerns with this, is we have proven the concept. We've proven the concept. We're shipping the product. People are willing to buy the product. And then our administration comes in and says, no, you can't. No, you can't. No, you can, but only if you slobber over the ring. No, you can, but only if you jump on your left foot 5 times as you pat your head and rub your belly, right? And so if it's already been proven, all of this stuff, you already have demand, other people are going to take that shit and run. Like, it's not, I don't think you need a PhD to explain that. Who knows? So anyways, I do think this is curious. And I'll be curious to see what Europe does with it. They'll probably fail. I mean, it's Europe. Come on, they fuck everything up. Oh dear, Europe. I remember when the Euro came out. I was so proud of you. I was so excited about Europe. You know why I get so snarky about Europe? Because when the Euro came out and there was this whole idea of ever closer integration or whatever horse crap, I was actually excited about that, right? Because the United States needs another great power to bounce off of. And the reality is, Europeans don't like to hear this, but the Europeans are a lot like us. Right? We took a tremendous number of European immigrants into the United States. And when you look at Europe, I mean, some of the shit's a little weird, but it's the kind of weird we understand. It's the kind of weird we get. Here's the thing, you look at China, man, that's the kind of weird that just makes your brain hurt. You're just like, no, but no, that's just, oh, what is going on, right? As I've said, I backpacked through India for 4 months, and that was 4 months of like, what the fuck am I looking at? Are my eyeballs working? Do I need to reboot my eyeballs? I don't understand what I'm even looking at. Anyways, right? So I was excited about the European thing. Oh, yeah, that was 25 years ago. I was so excited about Europe 25 years ago. Anyways, so we'll see. We'll see what happens. So what do you think about this? What do you think about ASML taking an 11% cut of Mistral? The idea essentially being able to reinforce the European AI tech stack. What do you think about our administration literally forcing damn near everybody else in the world to build their own AI stacks because they're scared of what we're going to do with ours? I don't know. What do you think about this particular timeline? What do you think about Europe? Is Europe beside the Democratic Republic of Congo? Is that where it's at? I don't know. Put your thoughts down below. Give us a thumbs up, give us a thumbs down. Call me amazing, call me a moron. Just do it in that comment section. I will remind you, silicondojo.com still exists. It's still alive. We are bringing back the in-person education. Durham, North Carolina. It's going to be at American Underground. That will be coming soon. We're going to be having classes there. We're going to be doing Python and AI and Linux and networking and security and all that kind of stuff. We're also going to start having classes here in Asheville, North Carolina. On top of that, now we have a fireside chat coming up with Kyle. He is the CEO and founder of Huntress, a $2 billion cybersecurity startup company. We're going to have that fireside chat in October. So go to silicondojo.com, become a member, and then you will get the newsletters that I send out. And with that, see y'all later.